Welcome back to Cyber Distortion, the show where the shadows of the digital world come into focus. Today's episode dives deep into the mind of someone who once sat at the center of the internet's most notorious hacktivist movements. Our guest is Hector Monsegur, better known to some as Sabu, a former leading figure in both Anonymous and LULZSEC. Hector orchestrated some of the most high-profile cyber attacks of the early 2010s. From penetrating government networks to being at the heart of a global FBI takedown, Hector's story is part cautionary tale, part cyber thriller. In this conversation, he shares it all raw, unfiltered, and in his own words. Again, welcome to the show.
Boy, I'm so excited, Kevin. I mean, jacked up, man. You know why I'm jacked up?
I don't know. I have no clue, man. Why are you?
I know you don't. You normally don't have a clue. But
let
me tell you the reason why.
Are you on something, Jason? Do I need to be worried about tonight, man?
Yeah, what I'm on is excitement, man. I am so jacked, dude.
Let's go. What you got?
Episode 6. All right. We are bringing epicness to you all, man. So hope you guys have been following along this season and you've noticed that we continue to bring fresh, new, epic level content to you all. And 100% tonight, we're like cherry on top tonight, man. This thing is epicness of all episodes. Now, we're going to have to do a lot to really top this one. And if I'm not getting you excited already, let me jump in a little bit about what we're talking about. Tonight, we're interviewing the LULZSEC Mastermind himself. All right. We have with us a special guest, and his name is Hector Monsegur. Now, Hector currently is a director of research at Alacrinet, who's also a sponsor of our show.
Shout out Alacrinet.
Shout out to you guys. Thank you for all that you're doing for us and for this great guest. But what you don't know that you're getting ready to know is how we're going to shock the pants off of you with this guest. Man, if you are in cybersecurity and you're following anything other than the next challenge you have to deal with, you are going to know what we're talking about when we bring this guy on, man. This guy has been a part of some epic hacks. I mean, epic, right? And we're going to tell his backstory. We're going to tell, and most importantly, what he's doing today and how he's turned some of this around to give all of you a better world to live in. So we're going to jump into all of that goody in just a second. But first of all, I want to thank our sponsors, and I want to do a shout out to these guys. So without these guys, we absolutely would not be bringing epic episodes like the one we have tonight on. So sponsors tonight, we have Threat Locker, who's been a sponsor now for a couple of years. We have Alacrinet, who is bringing us Hector tonight. Great guest. We have Fulcrum, who's also sponsoring us on some Black Hats stuff that we're doing. So we're going to be a Black Hat shout out here. We're at Black Hat this year and DEF CON. And if you are wanting to look at sponsorship opportunities, get with us, talk to us about it. We're doing some live shows in Vegas during these 2 sessions, Black Hat and DEF CON, and we'd love to have you as a sponsor. And the last one is CypherNova AI. So these sponsors make it possible for us to do some great epic stuff. And tonight, we're going to bring epic to you. Kevin, dude, did I share how excited I was about this one? I
don't think anybody can really quite comprehend how excited you are, Jason. I think you might need to get a little bit more amped up because it's not obvious yet.
Oh, dude, you just wait. I'm bringing some love, man.
All right, we're gonna see, dude. We're gonna see.
This is one of the things, dude, where when you're in the field of cybersecurity and there's multiple facets of trying to understand what the field of cybersecurity really is, but one of those is to understand the mind of the black hat hackers.
Yeah.
Like, how are they coming to the conclusions that they do in order to find a way in, right? Because if you can understand that, then you could defend against that. And tonight we're bringing them straight to you, right? We're going to jump right into the mind of a former black hat hacker, and we're going to learn a little bit about what that spiciness is all about. But Kevin, let me turn it over to you and get a few words from you and Hector.
Yeah, man. So as Jason mentioned, yeah, we're super excited about this. We've been talking to Hector about coming on for a while now. We've even had to reschedule this episode a time or two just to make this happen when it worked conveniently for all of us. And tonight is that night, man. And Jason, you said you're 100% freaking on board, amped up, fired up about this episode. I'm 1,000% amped up about this episode.
Okay.
I knew when we started this podcast, 4 years ago now? I don't even remember. I knew we'd get opportunities down the road to talk to people in the industry and get to understand and hear and let them tell their incredible stories. This is one of those stories. This is one of those episodes where we were like, dude, we're going to get some badass guests on this podcast, and we're going to get to know them, become friends with them, get to hear their stories, get to share those stories. This is the opportunity we've been waiting for one of those stories. Now, if any of the listeners have never heard of Hector, I'm going to read a couple blurbs that I found online, and there's many, many, many articles online about your incredible story, Hector. But these are just a couple of the blurbs. I don't want to tell the story for you. I just want to get everybody a little excited about these little breadcrumbs, and then I'm going to hand it over to you, man. So Monsegur became a central figure in the hacker collective Anonymous. Now, we've all heard of Anonymous. Everybody that knows anything about hacking knows who Anonymous is, what they're all about, and Hector was part of that group for a while and co-founded an offshoot from that group called LULZSEC. Jason mentioned LULZSEC. This was back in 2011. Hector was known under the pseudonym of Sabu and led cyber attacks targeting major corporations and government entities, including Sony, PayPal, Visa, MasterCard, and the U.S. Senate. These attacks were often politically motivated or intended to expose security vulnerabilities. Now, guys, we're not talking about some half-ass hacker here. We're talking about serious ex-anonymous mastermind level hacker. Now, here's another blurb, and we'll get into this part later. This is where it gets really cool because Hector's going to tell the story about what he's doing today. On the other side of the law stood a gentleman by the name of Chris Tarbell. He was an FBI agent responsible for infiltrating Anonymous and leading the takedown of the notorious Silk Road marketplace. Jason and I have talked about Silk Road in our dark web episodes.
Yes, we have.
In 2 different episodes, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get into who Chris was and how Hector and Chris know each other and what that's like today. But the story's absolutely insane. So Hector, I'm going to quit talking. I'm going to hand it over to you, man. Welcome to the show. We can't wait to get into this story, dude. This is so freaking cool.
Yeah, no, well, thanks for having me. I think it'll be fun.
Man.
Yeah, it'll be a great conversation. There's a lot of cool things to kind of discuss cyber related. My story is always interesting. I like to share with folks because there's a lot of takeaways. There's a lot of lessons to learn from it, from both even the adversarial perspective. There's some stuff there that folks can learn for their red teams, and then for the defensive teams, some of the lessons and it kind of what made us effective as adversaries. I think it'll be fun, and yeah, the whole Chris connection will be fun once you get to it. I think it's ironic. I think it's funny.
very ironic. Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
But it's a pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, man. I got to tell you. So one disclaimer I want to throw out there, even though I'm just so jacked and excited about this conversation, I want to throw out a disclaimer. In no way are we glorifying or looking at the work that Hector has done in the past and condoning that as some rock star story. That is not what we're doing here. But what we are doing is highlighting the severity of the work that Hector has done. And as a result of that, the now changed person that Hector is and how he is taking that to make a difference. That is the end story here. Then no matter what we come up with, at the end of the day, that's the end story here that I hope you all take away from this episode. Take away the complexity of what he did in his past and then honor the work that he's doing now in his present, because that's what this is about today. So,
but
that,
Jason, one other thing.
Yes.
Also,
Yes,
we have to recognize and appreciate the badassery, the epic badassery that occurred on both sides of the spectrum, because
absolutely,
it is incredible. It is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, there's epic badassery all over this story, and let's quit highlighting it and jump right into this bad boy. So, look, Hector, I think we got to start with the origin story. We want to know like how you got started, like your upbringing, when you some of the adversity you dealt with as a youth, and eventually how that led you into working with computers and led you to where you are. And the reason for that, we do this a lot with our guests, and the reason for that is there's a lot of things that are synonymous with both white hat hackers, black hat hackers, with geeks, techies, in their how they arrived at doing the things they're doing, and people can relate to that. And so I want to hear what that's all about for you.
Yeah, no, that's I'm excited to share that. And I, by the way, I couldn't have said it any better. Like the one thing that I tell folks as I kind of share the story is that it's not about glorifying any of this stuff, right? I've learned my lessons. In fact, I do a lot of mentoring now. I try to guide people in the right direction, because the cybersecurity industry is in a place now where it's great for a career. It's great because you're doing some really good things, and every company in this country, if we're talking about a U.S. audience only, plays a major part in the overall security posture of the nation. So, I'm always trying to help people as best as I can with that, and try not to hyper focus on, hey, I hacked into this, and more on, well, here's the lessons, right? Now, as for the origin story, I had a very different lifestyle growing up. My family were involved in organized crime. They were, my aunts, for example, she raised me. She was designated a queenpin status in the state of New York. And so we were really big into they were big into the drug game here. And there was a lot of murders that happened. There's a lot of really terrible stuff that happened. And I always tell folks, I never really had a childhood. I didn't get to experience a childhood because our lifestyle was always on the run and always, hiding from the cops. And then of course my family were arrested in 95, 96. When I say my family, I literally mean my family. My aunt went to prison, my dad went to prison, and my grandma. These were the three people that raised me. Okay. My mother was not in the picture. So I was literally by myself, literally homeless. Because I was lucky enough not to go into the system myself. Because over here in New York, we have like our own little juvie here, and I would have just been in the system, but I was spared that, and I kind of had to figure out my life moving forward. Am I going to follow in my father's footsteps, or am I going to try to figure out a different alternative route? Which it just so happens. And by the way, this was during the Giuliani era. I'm not sure if you guys know the history of New York, Giuliani, and what he did post La Cosa Nostra, right? The mafia. So once he was able to take down, the Gambino family, John Gotti, and the rest of those folks, he then started taking a look at like the localized small organizations all across New York City. And what he would do is he would do blanket conspiracy charges against entire neighborhoods. So in my family's case, they all went down these massive conspiracy charges with like 300 people. Like it was an entire neighborhood. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, since my aunt was, she was given a queen pin status, that's an automatic life. My father was also given life. And then my grandmother was given 5 to 15 or whatever it was. And they converted that to a probation because my dad and my aunt took the charges for her. So right before my aunt went to prison, she had bought me a computer because that was all the rage back then. This is what, 95? 95, you had hackers coming out, and the net just came out right after 96, right? And so you had like the Matrix come out not that long after. And so, a lot of what we heard was, hey, computers are going to be the future. And so before she got arrested, she went to, what's that place, man? PC Richards. I'm not sure they even exist anymore.
Oh yeah, PC Richards. I know where PC Richards.
Yeah,
they're out there. They're up. I know about those. When we need parts, we always run to PC Richards right there in Long Island City.
That's right. They had a bunch of random parts, miscellaneous parts. They were all over the place. But PC Richards also had a computer line. And my aunt, remember, she's from the streets. She has fast drug money. She doesn't really know any better. She doesn't know any specs. So she went and grabbed the most expensive PC at the time that was on the PC Richards floor. And that was the brand new, beautiful looking Sony Vaio. It was a Sony Vaio computer. And it was really made for like graphics artists and editors, right? It wasn't made for like personal computing, even though it's the same thing, right? And it had 16 megabytes of RAM. And so that was pretty beefy for back then.
Oh, 95. Yeah, for mid-90s, for sure.
Yeah. It had a 14.4K AT&T modem. It was running Windows 95. Windows 95. And so, yeah, she had that there, and she left it in my house. Cops came, destroyed everything except for that one box.
Wow.
And when I came back home, my grandmother was left out of prison. She left Rikers Island. We went straight home, and I just connected it, and I got online. I followed the instructions. I started reading the manuals, and it came with like an AOL CD. So here I am. I'm signing up for AOL trial, and my cousin comes over, Kenny, and Kenny's like, "Hey, let me get you on, and let me get you connected. I know you're probably depressed. You lost your family, and voila, that's it, right?" So now I'm online, and it was a wild time. It was the Wild West. A lot of folks from that era started the same way as I.
Yeah.
Unless you had the fortune of having really good, wealthy parents who had access to Unix licenses and all that cool stuff, you were probably learning the way I did. Here's how I learned. As soon as I got online, I wanted to know what a hacker was, right? Kind of what the hackers just came out. So what is a hacker? And so I get online. I'm on AOL, and AOL had a big wares scene. You guys remember that thing? The wares?
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
AOL had a massive wares scene, and I log into one of the rooms, one of the channels, and somebody sends me basically a list of what they have. And there was a compressed file. It was an archive they had called Intro to Hacking, Freaking, and the Anarchist Cookbook. Huh. So I downloaded it, and it was a zip file. And inside the zip file, you had the Anarchist Cookbook, chapter by chapter. And then you had a bunch of freaking materials. How to build a blue box, and what's a rainbow box, and what's a red box, what's a yellow box. But you got to remember, 95, by the time I got those materials, New York City, NYNEX, that was our phone system back then, phone company, NYNEX, had already converted from analog to digital lines. So a lot of the freaking stuff was kind of irrelevant.
Yeah.
Right? And so I started reading the other stuff that was inside the archive, which was the Hacker's Manifesto by the Mentor. The Conscience of a Hacker.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
This is.
They reference that in Hackers, the movie too, right?
They had Mark Anthony read the Hacker Manifesto.
Yeah, exactly.
It changed my life. I was like, whoa, this is amazing. It doesn't matter what they look like. It matters what you think. That's from the article, from the essay. My crime is that of curiosity, something you will never forgive me for. So it's like I read all that stuff. I was like, okay, cool. I think I'm a hacker now. I think I can fit this. And so now I'm reading everything. I had to get off of Windows.
Yeah.
And so I downloaded Slackware on a bunch of floppies, and I installed Slackware, and now I'm home, Slackware, Linux, and I'm connecting to the internet using Earthlink accounts that were stolen from who knows where. And instead of going to AOL, now I'm on IRC.
Yeah.
Okay?
This is probably late 90s.
This is mid to late 90s, yeah?
Yeah.
So mid to late 90s, I'm on IRC. You have my beautiful Earthlink connection. At some point, I upgraded my modem from 14K to 28.8 or 28, whatever it was.
28.8.
Yeah, 28.8. And I couldn't afford 56K. You know, I was poor. It was a poor family at that point. So, but yeah, I spent a lot of my time on IRC. But here's what the cool thing. What is hacking? I still was trying to answer that question. And so I didn't have any mentors. I just read a lot, guys. I read a lot. I'm self-taught. I learned how to program on my own. I spent an entire summer. This might sound ridiculous to you guys. I spent an entire summer when I was like 14, 15, learning how to program in Python. Because Python, we had version 14.7 or whatever it was, you know. And so I'm learning Python by reading the manual. And now, you know, I'm looking at web application security articles. And back then, web application security articles were based on CGI. What was CGI? Perl and C. So now I had to learn Perl. I had to learn C. And now I'm kind of going to the deep dive. Yeah, it was a mess. But honestly, you know what really helped inspire me even further? Beyond Hackers Manifesto, beyond learning Python on my own, beyond the summer of hacking away at Slackware, Linux, it was watching war games. I'm going to tell you why.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to tell you why. There's one specific point in war games that's still relevant to today.
Yeah.
And then it was reading about the internet's first cyber war. You guys remember that?
Yes. I don't remember that.
Masters of Deception versus the Legion of Doom.
Yes.
The boys from Texas versus the boys from New York. All right? The Legion of Doom were from Texas. The hackers from New York were the Masters of Deception.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure you guys know this. The Masters of Deception, some of the members were actual gang members from the streets. And they learned about computers. They learned about phone freaking. Okay?
Wow.
Interesting.
Now, war games really inspire me because there's something to this day that's still relevant. And that is this.
Huh.
And I don't want to call out CISOs out there. Just bear with me. But in the film War Games, Matthew Broderick, he calls into the Whopper machine, or Joshua, right?
Yeah.
And they're communicating back and forth bidirectionally. Well, one way. But then the Department of Defense, or NORAD, they put up a firewall. The firewall blocks incoming connections between Whopper and Matthew Broderick until Whopper calls him back. And why did that still work? It's a reverse shell. Most companies, most security guys, most network engineers are looking to block ingress traffic. They're not monitoring outbound or egress traffic.
Yeah.
Right? So war games taught me that lesson. And then with the Masters of Deception, because they were from New York, I was inspired by them. Their one guy, Mark Abin, a.k.a. Fiber Optic, was known as the Unix hacker. And guess what? I wanted to be known as a Unix hacker. So then I got deeper into Unix. And for the next 15 years of my life, I ran BSD only.
Wow.
I even said, screw Linux, I'm BSD only. Be it NetBSD, FreeBSD, OpenBSD.
Yeah.
And that's how I got into hacking and cybersecurity. And IRC was a big part of it. Is, being part of the community, being part of the quote unquote scene. And that's how I got into it. All that extra stuff, the political hacktivism came much later.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, man. It's because I know you've got the backstory on your upbringing, how you got your first computer, what interested you, the fact that there was a lot of things timing wise that were going on for anybody that was roughly our age back then. And the mid 90s is when this movement, this internet hacking movement kind of started taking off.
Blew up.
But
absolutely.
It blew up. Yeah, for sure. And a lot of that was Hollywood. Let's be real. I mean, we see that. We're fascinated by that. And at the time, none of us knew how much of it was real, how much of it was Hollywood.
That's right.
But I guess for me, what I want to know is you got into it. You started seeing these factions that were online as part of just getting to know other people online in your circles. and the Legion of Doom, and you said who was the other one?
The Masters of Deception.
So Masters of Deception, New York, Legion of Doom, Texas. It all sounds like some sort of online Civil War type thing going on. You had to choose your side. So tell me this though, when you got involved in that and got a little deeper into it, once you started to understand the motivation behind these groups, what was pushing you to keep learning and to keep moving forward, and what was the agenda, and what were these guys why were they in opposition with one another, I guess is really where I'm going with that. I need to try to understand that.
Well, I would recommend that you read the books, and there's a lot of if you guys are still big into e-zines, e-zines shaped a lot of us from our age group. So in fact, if you go to textfiles.com, thank God that they're archiving tens of thousands of e-zines from that era, from the 70s all the way to the 90s, and even some more recently. But yeah, the conflict between those two groups really had to do with disrespect. They used to hack into phone systems, and they both groups got on the call, and somebody sent the N-word, and then of course that started a whole big thing, right? So that's why they got into a beef. And by the time that I got online, early 95, they already been arrested. That whole movement had died. Well, not died, but all those guys went to prison, and it kind of quieted down. But now is the rise of the new movement, the new scene of a bunch of different groups. We got to remember, during that time, we're talking about the cult of Dead Cow, right?
Yeah.
Right? We're talking about Team Tesso and ADM and Woo Woo. And there's a whole bunch of different groups, a lot of them from Europe. And a lot of what they did was security research, and some may call it weaponizing of vulnerabilities. They were creating exploits and trading those exploits. A lot of things got hacked during that era, okay? Because 0 days were aplenty, and protections against those exploits were minimal, and companies were not really prepared for that. I mean, look, if you look at a 100-year-old company, Chris and I covered on a recent episode last year, I think. There was a company out of the UK. They went bankrupt after ransomware, but they've been there for 150 years, right? You take a company like that, it's a legacy company, been around for a long time. A lot of the executives are probably aged out. And then you connect them to the internet and start creating networks around these people, right? There's going to be a lack of security policy. There's not going to be an understanding or, of what needs to be done and what needs to be enforced and what needs to be validated. So yeah, that time was an interesting time because you could literally hack into anything. And I did, right? Not glorifying it, but I did. And I was the lone hacker. I was the guy that was breaking into networks, quietly patching. In fact, that's how I became a systems administrator, right? I always told the story kind of like a joke, in a joking way, at conferences. I say, back in those days, maybe you guys remember this, but back in those days, the only way, or one of the major ways you could determine whether or not you've been hacked was if your systems are running fine, right?
Yeah.
Your systems are running fine. You got to remember, those days, servers were rebooting, blue screens of death. Servers were getting packed offline. There's a whole bunch of maintenance issues. But wait, my network's been running smooth for the last 6 months. I wonder why. Because you have a Hector in there logging in and maintaining persistence. It still rings a bell to this day. Maintaining persistence by updating and taking care of your systems.
That's incredibly crazy to think about.
It's crazy too, because a lot of the patterns in what you're speaking to, and we've had this with other guests when we talk about this. I've been doing this for a very long time, and back in the mid 80s to the mid 90s, that era, it absolutely, there was zero protection.
Sure.
that was like if you got access and you can get it, you got it. You pulled it down and you interrogated it, you learned from it, and you used it in your own stuff, and you built off of it, and you did more stuff. And that's just how it worked. That's what everyone was doing, and that was in computing. Until at some point where this stuff became super proprietary, and people got pissed because you were getting access to their stuff, but they still didn't know how to protect it.
They didn't know how to protect it. They didn't have the capabilities to protect it. We got to remember that SYN cookies and NAT came late in the 90s, right? So before then, your printer if you needed internet access, your printer was connected with an external facing IP address, right? It was a completely different era. There was a few things that happened that I think changed the game. One, the conspiracy of, hey, we're running out of IP addresses. That was BS, right? The whole IPv4 is running out. We have to, save money, right? That was BS. But the consequence of the BS is that it saved a lot of companies because NATS, network address translation, was invented. And now you can have 15,000 computers off of one IP address. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. The next thing that changed the game for everybody was, you had a couple big incidents, especially worms, right? Worm number one that I can remember, well, aside from like the Melissa worm and I love you worm, right? Besides that stuff, it's more endpoint user. The big one that pretty much almost killed the internet, I'm sure you guys remember this, was Code Red.
Oh, yeah.
Code Red
absolutely.
almost killed the internet.
Yep.
Because it was so wormable and so effective that literally the internet across the entire planet slowed down.
Yeah, it just started spreading like crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But after that, you had NIMDA, right? You had Sasser after that.
I actually got access to that code through an infected machine. It wasn't one of my machines, but it was an infected machine.
NIMDA or Code Red?
Code Red. I got access to the code and reverse engineered it and would look through it. And dude, I'm telling you, I looked at that code and I'm like, holy crap, dude. This is so simple. The concept on what they put together was so darn simple that I just couldn't believe that, things like this were able to take down the internet, that it was just crazy. And it did change my thinking. So going back to that, learning from these types of attacks changes the way you think about how you approach it. And I would tell you this, from that day, that stuck with me from that day. And everything that I do, I think about those types of vectors. Like, what are the simple things that no one's thinking about that are left open and leaving us vulnerable?
Yeah.
Well, Hector, before we jump into our first break, I do want to ask you, you're into now advancing your skill set. You're obsessed with hacking. But talk a little bit about that very first hack. What was that like? How did that feel? When did you know you were successful with the first hack?
That's such a great question. It brings back memories, and I have not forgotten it. In fact, I have some fun facts for you guys. Okay. So my first legitimate me doing it compromise was against a server in Japan whose university server was a .ac.jp hostname, and they had an Apache web server, very very old Apache web server. It may not have even been Apache; it could have been a generic web server, and it had a CGI bin, and they had a CGI script, and one of the scripts was called PHF. You could read files remotely if you knew how to do a little bit of Perl trickery. And so I read the password file from the system. It was a Solaris machine. That's one, right? Two, the master.password was not implemented in Solaris yet. So once you read the etc/password file, that's it. You had all the hashes. I downloaded John the Ripper from my old computer on my dial-up, and I just let it rip.
Crack the hash.
And I cracked the hash. Mind you, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm complete neophyte. I have zero mentorship. I'm going by what I'm reading.
Yeah.
Okay? So big shout out to the text files for archiving all the easies. I get the credential. I'm like, wow, how do I get from the credential now to the machine? Like, how do I log into that? And then, again, going through the easies, I find a document called How to Hack Telenet Using Telnet. And I guess Telenet back then was some sort of company, ISP, right?
Yeah.
And it says how to hack into Telenet using Telnet. And I'm like, wait, can I use Telnet to log into that machine with these credentials? Bada bing, I log in over Telnet. I get access to the machine, and now I have local privileged access. I had a sync account. So now I had to change from a sync account to root account. Now I'm looking up vulnerabilities. There was a Solaris vulnerability called, it was like a sync privilege escalation from the sync account to the root account. I was able to do that successfully. Again, just reading random stuff, letting osmosis, take over. And then I'm in, and I have root. And now I'm like, what the hell do I do now?
Now that you have God mode, what can you do to wreak havoc?
What can I do?
What was the point of all of this, right?
Yeah.
And so now I'm going to the Sun. Well, it was a Solaris. It was SunOS, right? SunOS. So now I'm looking up SunOS documentation, how to update the system, and how to do this and how to do that, where to download patches. You know, I spent so much time on that machine learning how to manage it that I became a systems admin. That was my first job in real life, right? I never got into. My first job wasn't in security. I'll tell you that much. Now let me tell you something. Here's the best fact of it all. I maintained that SunOS server out in Japan for 9 years.
Wow.
Holy crap.
No
dude.
way.
From 1997, 1998 to whatever it was to like 2006 until they took it offline. Okay?
Wow.
You know why that's the best part about this?
Yeah.
Is because when you're telling this story, I'm still watching your eyes light up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You see it.
Yeah.
You talk about that first hack, the fact that you own this machine for 9 years, dude, and your eyes are.
Just think, man, that tech team was just like, dude, we're cool as shit, man.
Our
shit's
stuff never
great.
goes down.
Yeah.
They need to hire us to do this for everybody.
Yeah. Superhuman.
Oh,
Wow.
yeah. It was exciting because I was a kid. What motivated me was curiosity, right? There was no weaponization of exploits for money. There was no ransomware. There was no shit. Part of my language, but we lived in poverty. We were dying, right? But that wasn't even part of my ethos. Like, how can I get money out of this? It was really about knowledge is power. Going back to the Hackers Manifesto, my crime, I only judge you by what you say and think, not what you look like. That meant a lot to me because every movie I saw about hacking, you had people that did not fit my demographic, or I didn't fit the demographic. All right, cool.
Yep.
It was really a knowledge thing, and it wasn't until later. I guess we could talk about it after the break. They got into the politics of it because that's where it gets crazy.
Yeah.
Right on.
Well, let's hold on to that because
Yep.
we do need to get in break. And I'm already telling Kevin, this is one that we could just keep going for 3 hours, on this stuff. So
Yeah.
let's jump into a break, regroup, and come back and get into more detail.
Yep.
Sounds good.
Alacronet is a value-added reseller that provides cybersecurity-specific security solutions, services, and staffing. We are an agnostic security partner, which allows us to present multiple options for each security need. Our catalog of services encompasses a range of security solutions, penetration tests, and staffing options. With our approach, we can bring the best options and price points forward to increase your security posture and prevent vulnerabilities. Alacronet is constantly adding new partners to meet the challenges of an ever-changing security landscape. As security experts, we know how to find security talent. Our entire organization is focused on cybersecurity, from leadership to sales team to technical staff and hiring staff. For more information on our vast list of solutions or services, please give us a call or visit our website at www.alacronet.com. We look forward to growing with your business.
Holy cow, dude. Man, look, we went to break and we started having a whole nother conversation in break, talking about all kinds of things. And we had to cut that one off too, because we would have been another hour just in break having a conversation on some crazy stuff. Look, one of the things I want to call out, we did talk about this in break, and that's the reason why I want to call this out, and then we're getting some juicy juice. But it is very important that all of us, and it's one of the reasons why Kevin and I do this podcast today, but it's very important for all of us to continue to mentor and grow this society that we have called cybersecurity professionals. This community is so important, and we need the youth to start being more involved in it, to continue this path forward. As Hector was talking about earlier today, in his past and how he got started. It was a long time ago. I mean, that was like the essence of computing at the time. And it was at the baseline of what we know today. The protocols that are being used came out of the work that was happening back then. So those, if we didn't have curious minds back then, we would not be advancing in technology the way we are today. That's an important point. And you don't get there if you don't have the youth also interested and excited and being curious about how do you do more with the technology we have and push the limits. So we got to push that part. I want to throw that out there. But now let's get back into some juicy juice. So we started to close this thing out from Hector's origin story. We talked about a lot of really good stuff, man, that had my heart just going as I was reminiscing about them days. But I got my hat back, and we're going to jump into goody. So pull up your pants and let's go. We're going to get into some of the meat here. So we're going to talk about the origins of how Hector got started with LULZSEC and Anonymous and some of the work associated with that at the time. I will call these pieces out because I'm sure you guys will all recognize these hacks, but these are all hacks that were a result of Hector's work, that he participated in some form as a result of either LULZSEC or his affiliation with Anonymous. And I'm just calling these out so you guys are aware of the magnitude of what he was involved in. So Sony Pictures in 2011, right off the bat, I will tell you, I knew day one when that thing hit, and I was pointing fingers at my kids, telling them, I told you don't put your stuff on Sony. I told you all wanted to get up into that Call of Duty and have a Call of Duty account, and I told you not to do that. So it was a bunch of stuff like that. PBS in 2011, the U.S. Senate, in 2011. Man, these are like the big time work products in 2011, man. The CIA's website in 2011, Operation Anti-Sec in 2011. And then the Stratford in 2011. These things are major hacks. There are major things that occurred in that 1 year. And this is all product of Hector's participation in some form. Now, again, this has happened. Hector's learned from it. We've learned from it. Mm-hmm. And as a result, we're all a little bit better. As I was stating earlier, Code Red, right? When that occurred, I was able to get access to it, reverse engineer it, and learn from it. And it's stuck in my noggin on tactics that people are using to exploit or exfiltrate or to, push out attacks in a very aggressive at scale manner. And now my brain is always locked into thinking that way, looking for the simple that we're not thinking about, because we're always trying to overcomplicate everything and think about the most complicated ways that people might be trying to hack. But let's not lose sight on the simple ways. Sometimes, that is the way hackers want to start, right? They don't want to do a lot of work. They want the simple stuff. Give them the simple stuff, right? And they'll get right in. So let's look for the simple things to stop. But if this isn't epic enough, right? Let's hear it. Let's hear it straight from Hector now. So Hector, tell us a little bit about how you got started with both LULZSEC and Anonymous.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But before I tell you that, I have to give a bit of history on hacktivism. So hacktivism as a concept wasn't new. Even when I got online, it wasn't new. It just didn't have the name hacktivism, okay? Depending on what news source you would read, it was a political hack or it was a potential terrorist hack or whatever it was. People had all sorts of names for it. But it wasn't until the mid-90s when the cult of Dead Cow conceptualized the term hacktivism, right? And I forgot what year it was, whether it was 96, 98. It was that range. And so back then, if you guys remember, there was a big thing going on in the world outside of the US. It was actually in China. And what was happening in China is that there was a non-religious movement by the name of Falun Gong. And Falun Gong was kind of like, you ever go to like a park? When you guys are here in New York, come to your headquarters, and you see like, you go to a park, you see a bunch of old Chinese people just doing it looks like they're doing Tai Chi, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, some of that is called Falun Gong. That's all it is, right? It's all about youth and health and keeping healthy. And that's why you see them at 5, 6 in the morning doing the stuff, right? The Tai Chi. Now, okay, cool. Fantastic. Now, in China, that became so popular that the Communist Party thought that it was an adversarial group trying to take over the country.
Oh my gosh.
And the Chinese government then did mass arrests and put these people essentially in concentration camps. And they were killing these poor people that were practicing Falun Gong or Tai Chi.
No way.
Yeah, it's crazy. Now, the reason why this is part of hacker history, and this is actually very important, people need to know this, is because as a result, you had a lot of Chinese dissidents, okay, political dissidents, that they wanted to get their words out. They wanted to speak up. This was, less than 20 years after, the tank man. You guys remember that? Tiananmen Square, right?
Mhm.
Yep.
So it was still very fresh. The students now are in their 30s, right? Now they're starting to organize, and the Chinese government sets up the Great Firewall of China, right? They set up the Great Firewall of China by the mid-90s.
Yeah.
Okay. So now you guys have some context. Cult of Dead Cow says we have to help our brothers in China, our brothers and sisters in China. Let's create something called Back Orifice, BO, BO2K, right? Now, BO, the original BO was a Trojan horse. The BO2K and above basically were, or BO2 to 2K, it was basically kind of like a poor man's tour where you would infect a bunch of computers, libraries, computers all around the world, right? And then the Chinese dissidents would be able to communicate through those infected machines as like a proxy, like an onionized proxy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very
Yeah, wow.
similar to Tor.
So this was before Tor?
before Tor.
Okay.
Yeah. So you could thank the Cult of Dead Cow. Look into that BO2K. They
That's
created
crazy.
They created
Yeah.
a poor man's Tor so that the Chinese dissidents could get on the internet. Now you guys have some context. Now we have hacktivism. And in the year 2000, here I am. I'm a kid. I'm getting politicized. Now I'm getting interested in politics. And it just so happens, my grandmother told me a story of where I came from. Well, our family came from. So we're from a small island in the Caribbean called Puerto Rico. Okay. And where she came from was a small town of the name of Lares. And Lares was where we tried to have an uprising, revolution, rather, against the Spaniards way back when. It failed, but that's where a lot of the revolutionary talks come out of Puerto Rico. In fact, I have one of the original flags here from the island when they had the revolution. And so my curiosity, now I'm curious. I said, well, can I do hacktivism? Can I do what Cult of Dead Cow is doing and some of these other groups? And can I participate? And so what was happening at that time, it's so crazy how so much things was happening around that era. But around that time, there was a major conflict in Puerto Rico, to the point that it started reaching the U.S. shores and U.S. news circuits because the United States Navy, they were using depleted uranium shells on a smaller island called Vieques. And Vieques is actually, it's not empty. People live there. And it actually has a higher rate of cancer than the rest of the islands. Okay.
Wow.
So that was a political thing. And so I got involved and I began working against the U.S. Navy and the Puerto Rican government because they were both hand in hand on those decisions. That was my first hacktivist operation. But 2001 changed the game. Not because of 9/11. But what you guys may have missed, if you weren't paying attention, we had the first U.S. Sino or China cyber war in 2011 prior to 9/11. And that was, this gets crazy. Do you guys remember there was an incident where you had a Chinese jets and a U.S. spy plane collide in China?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the pilot of the jet crashed and he passed, but the U.S. spy plane landed safely in China, and the Chinese would not give them up until they got a public apology from President Clinton. Now, since the public apology was not happening, and Clinton was not giving that apology, and the people involved were not giving that apology, what you end up happening was, what ended up happening was, and this was like 2000 to 2001, early to late 2000 and into early 2001, the Chinese hackers were upset, and they created a big warning message to the rest of us. They said, we are the Chinese Hacker Union, HUC, and we have 60,000 hackers ready to target U.S. infrastructure. And a lot of people laughed at it. But I didn't, because I was on IRC, and I ran into a lot of Chinese actors on that.
What year was this?
This was between 2000 and 2001.
Okay. Wow.
So you had the Chinese Hacker Union say, we are going to target U.S. interests. Nobody believed them, and they did exactly that. Overnight, you had .gov, .mil websites getting compromised with
I
Chinese
remember
flags.
that. I remember that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I was recruited by another hacker. He said, we have to target China back. And it just so happens, and I'm sorry for any Chinese Communist Party listeners here, I spent the rest of my career as an adversary hacking into China as a result. But it started with being recruited by a crazy Canuck, a Canadian, who said, Hector, we have to target China. And his name was Pantera, and he was part of Hackwiser. If you Google that, that was an old hacker group. And yeah, I spent the rest of my time hacking into China. Now, to fast forward, I give you guys history, right? You guys have some history. You fast forward, now it's 2009, 2010. Now the world is going through a whole bunch of more political craziness. You have the war in Iraq going ablaze, the situation in Afghanistan, and then you had WikiLeaks pop its head out of nowhere. And WikiLeaks started doing dumps and leaks of government leaks and videos of stuff that nobody wants to see, but you have to see in order to understand the plight of the drama of what's going on in the world, the injustices. And I was motivated by that. By then, by 2010, I was retired. But I brought Sabu back. Sabu the persona. Sabu the character. And so what I started doing was I started attacking, and this was right at the heights of, literally at the beginning of the Arab Spring. You guys remember that? It started with Tunisia. Okay? It started with Tunisia. And I was now involved with Anonymous. I joined the Tunisian channels. I said, how can I help? We just need to get the message across. We need to disable the infrastructure over there. So guess what? I gave the government of Tunisia a free pen test. Okay? And I started with discovery and identifying assets and looking for vulnerabilities, compromising assets within the government, taking down servers. We got access to the DNS servers, the central DNS servers. We got access to the central mail servers. It was a small country with small government infrastructure, so it's relatively easy to compromise them to the point that it affected them. We left a message of defacement on the president's webpage of Tunisia, and what he did was, it was the first time I ever saw, maybe Russia might be a good example of a country that has done this. It was the first time we saw during a revolution that the president of the country and the prime minister hit the internet kill switch. See, people theorized about the internet kill switch.
Yeah.
They theorized it until it happened. And Tunisia did it first. And so we still hacked into Tunisia. You probably have to ask yourself, or right, ask, hey, heck, how the hell did you hack back into Tunisia if they hit the kill switch? You had no way to access their networks. But tell you what, war games. Joshua called me back. I had a Tunisian activist that connected over dial-up internet. You cannot block dial-up. It's a phone system, phone line. He logged into IRC with his phone system. He gave me a reverse shell on his computer. And with the slowest internet possible from here to Tunisia, I started breaking back into Tunisian government infrastructure.
Wow.
Because they were blocking ingress. They were not blocking egress. So from Tunisia went to Egypt, from Egypt went to Syria, from Syria went to Libya, and we just continuously started attacking government infrastructure, one after another. If you remember the Arab Spring, it was just one after another after another. Until things got a little weird here in the U.S. as well. There's a lot of weird things happening with federal contractors. A lot of federal contractor problems here. And I'm sure we have friends that are federal contractors. It's not against our friends, but it's against the people that are in leadership. And so we had an incident where we compromised a federal contractor and we publicized it. And the purpose behind that is that, we compromised them because they made the claim that they were going to take down Anonymous. But what we found in their emails, once I got in, is that they were working with the Chambers of Commerce to stalk people. And one of the people that were stalking was Glenn Greenwald from The Intercept or whatever he works now. I don't align with Glenn Greenwald, right? I don't align with his politics. But I was curious. Why would the Chamber of Commerce pay a federal contractor to stalk this guy and have pictures of him eating a sandwich with his boyfriend? I'm curious. So we dumped it and we leaked it all. And then we started targeting the CIA. And of course, we had, hacking the CIA website doesn't mean anything. I'm sure you guys know that. It's nothing. It's just a static webpage. But we got into the FBI Academy, which is a wealth of knowledge. And then we looked at Stratford. Stratford eventually was a thing. But by the time I got to Stratford, I got arrested, right? So I was arrested before then. But yeah, it's been an interesting ride. That's how I got into hacktivism. It was originally curiosity. Originally, it was me being young and naive. I thought I could help people. Now, in hindsight, I'm not sure I helped anybody. In hindsight, maybe what I did was I boosted up the cybersecurity industry, because if you notice, right after 2011, the cybersecurity industry blew the hell up exponentially. So yeah, that was my ride.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like, though, as you look back on that journey, the opportunities to do more kind of came and gone at that time?
Yeah.
And although at the time you were focused on a certain path that was driving you, and to right wrongs, however you thought those wrongs were, you wanted to right them in some kind of way, and eventually you wasn't really righting those wrongs, but adding to the wrongs in some way that then other people eventually were profiting from, because in the end of the day, other people came back and were like, oh, that group was doing this. I got a solution for that no one solved yet, and I'm going to start profiting off of it. Right?
You're 100% right.
Yeah. And so, there's multiple angles that this takes from the perspective of, people look at computer engineers and network engineers and engineers of whatever in technology, and they're like, wow, these dudes are so smart, man. Look at all the cool stuff they've been doing. And even as an engineer, you look at your work, but sometimes we fail to see the magnitude of the work that we build and create, and how we could, just with a different perspective, we could do so much more with that work. And that was one of the things that was hitting me hard as you were talking about these, because a lot of those attacks I remember, and I remember sitting back thinking, holy cow, man, look at that. Someone's very super aggressive at trying to get this stuff done. And in my head, I'm thinking, why is that important? Not knowing the rest of these, the pieces that align with these stories, and, or all of the other quiet political attacks that are happening that no one knows about, that leads to something like this, that it's easy for all the rest of us to look back and be like, yeah, or whatever, man, these people are just doing this stuff just to make a point, right? Big deal. And at the end of the day, there is things going on that absolutely are outside of our control, and maybe something is going to jar the systems into the right direction, but at the end of the day, it makes more sense for us to fight it the way we're fighting it now, to think about the white hat hacker mentality of defending and red teaming to learn how to defend even better, so that we can stop not just the hacktivists that are trying to do some things, but the malicious intents that are also happening for whatever reason, for monetary gain.
A couple of the things that stuck out for me as Hector was talking there is, all this stuff that you were doing back then, you were doing it without some of the more advanced anonymity tools that are out there today. You got started well before Tor, as we talked about.
Yeah.
So a lot of the things that we are now able to do to maintain that anonymity across different servers on the internet didn't even exist to the degree that they do today. So that's impressive in and of itself. But the other thing that stuck out is that you mentioned the guy who said he's going to shut down Anonymous. Did people realize how foolish they sound when they say something like that? But because do they understand the expanse of what they're really even saying? Because Anonymous is, never ending.
Well, Anonymous is not a group; it's a concept, right? We could all be anonymous. We could all work on something together. It doesn't have to be a group membership. We don't have to register nowhere. And that's why I joined Anonymous, and I came back out, and I joined again. And once my hacks became too, and this is a good word, the word is radical. Once my hacks were looked at as too radical for Anonymous, this is why we created LULZSEC. I'm not sure you guys knew that.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of senior, quote unquote, senior members, guys that have been around Anonymous since the beginning. Remember, Anonymous wasn't young either. Anonymous has been around since the mid 2000s. They've been doing grassroots, offline, physical protests against the Church of Scientology since the 2000s, right? So like it wasn't a new thing. They were doing stuff like this for a minute. It's just that, you know, the media exaggerated their capability. If I tell you, when I joined the IRC network for Anonymous and there were 500,000 people there was about 6 hackers. Okay? There was about 6, 7, maybe. And guess what? They were mostly from Eastern Europe. Croatia, Romania, right? They were just lending support or seeing if anybody had any info against their countries.
Yeah.
Right? So when I joined, and I had a wealth of knowledge already as an adversary, it was very easy for me to rise in the ranks. And then once I had folks tell me, hey, listen, you guys are way too radical for us, cool, we'll just create LULZSEC. We don't care. But yes, it was an interesting time to suss out a lot of the problems, to kind of identify the problems that existed at the time for organizations, for governments. You know, the thing that I say, I'm very critical. I was an adjunct professor with my good friend Sam Curry. You guys know who Sam Curry is. He's a CISO Zscaler, a good friend of mine.
Yep.
You guys probably should have him on your podcast.
We've had the CTO, not the CISO, though.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. You gotta get Sam from Zscaler on here because he is
Okay.
a brilliant mind. He's basically me without having to go to jail, right? So Sam and I we were both adjunct professors for a really cool university in Massachusetts, and we were teaching information warfare, cyber warfare. And it was such a great class because we broke down all the elements of what makes up propaganda and the differences between misinformation versus disinformation, the politicization of certain topics and scenes and communities, like cybersecurity. Now cybersecurity, unfortunately, is politicized.
Yeah.
Right. But prior to that, it was quite radical. And it was very radical in the sense that you had a lot of, people that probably didn't belong in a company, working security for a company, doing security for a company. And you're going to see a lot more of that. In fact, it's kind of one of my thesis of like last year. My thesis for last year was you're going to see the uprising or the rise of the insider threat, right? I was off. Now we're seeing insider threats this year, but last year was more the ransomware, info stealers. But yeah, man, it's wild. Now let me tell you guys one thing before we kind of wrap up this portion here. I really love geopolitics and having a conversation, having discourse about, well, here's the foreign policies of the U.S. versus UK, and here's what's happening in Ukraine versus Russia. Blah, 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 blah. We got those conversations. I love all that stuff. When you start adding technology to that, it becomes very dangerous because there was once a point where if there was warfare prior to 2010, right? Prior to us breaking into Tunisia during the uprising and shutting them down. A lot of the cyber warfare that you guys saw was probably a defacement. I'm sure you guys remember the defacements, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe exfiltration of files and data, maybe, right? We saw that happen with the Office of Personnel Management, OPM. That was like a 3-year campaign of exfiltration.
Yeah.
And then, of course, for private businesses, you see the theft of IP, okay?
Yeah.
But now is a whole different ballgame. Now it could be political. It's also weaponized. It's radicalized, politicized, and it's monetary. The adversaries could be a part of the North Korean government. They could be a Russian operative. They could be a Chinese Communist Party member, or it could be a bored Chinese kid looking to get a couple of dollars for his next anime cartoon characters, right?
Yeah.
From the defense perspective, the blue teams are probably dealing with more than they did 5 years ago. 10 years ago.
Yeah,
Way
for
more.
sure.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah.
Totally agree. One thing you didn't talk about, and before we get into the actual arrest, I do want to mention this because I think it's a cool part of the story of LULZSEC.
Mm-hmm.
What was the movement of 50 days of LULZSEC about?
Sure.
And did this transpire before your arrest or after?
Great question. So the 50 days of lulz was, okay, that's a great question. So after we kind of created LULZSEC and branched off because Anonymous felt that we were too radical for them, we did nonstop compromises. It was me. So there was 2 hackers inside of LULZSEC. I'm gonna give you guys some perspective. I'm gonna give you guys some backstory. There were 2 legitimate hackers in LULZSEC, and that was Sabu, myself, and Kayla, Ryan Ackwood, good friend of mine. I love him. I love his wife. They're great family. So Sabu and Kayla would sit there all day looking for victims. Right? Doesn't matter what company, government, doesn't matter. Okay. Then you had a third person that was part of the circle, but they weren't technically quote unquote LULZSEC, but that was Palladium. The Palladium is actually a very famous guy now. I can't pronounce his name because it's very Irish. You know, I don't want to disrespect his name, but very smart guy. Much love for him because he's doing a lot of great stuff. He did a really good breakdown of the Pegasus malware strain not that long ago. And so you had 2 to 3 adversaries. Then you had a whole bunch of components, external affiliates of of LULZSEC called Pure Elite. And you have people like Recursion, good friend of mine, Cody. You guys should have him as well because he's a really, really good pro in the space. He's in the MSSP space. And there's a couple other folks that weren't arrested. Now, you had all of this happening. You had a couple of these hackers, and then the rest of the group would do like media, right? Or they would set up infrastructure, or they'll coordinate with whoever, the victims, and do interviews and, you know, put up easies, invoices. It's nonsensical. But going back to your question, what was really fascinating about the whole thing, the whole experience was that we were just hacking nonstop. The 50 days of laws only came about because some of the members, the guys in the UK, they started getting cold feet. They said, I don't know, this might be a little bit crazy for us. And so they wanted to kill off LULZSEC. Okay. Now, ironically, as all of this is happening, all this drama is happening, we're going to kill LULZSEC, blah, blah, blah. We're just going to call it the 50 days of 50 days of laws. And every day we're going to post a big hack. Okay. While all of that is happening, I get arrested. I get caught.
Oh, dang.
I got to knock on the door.
Right then, right during that time.
During that time, I got arrested. I had to knock on the door, you know, and then that's a whole other story, right? That's a fun one because, you know, I could write a book on that whole experience with the FBI. The FBI is an interesting crowd.
Okay, well, we're going to get into that next.
Yeah. So that's important. We got to get into that.
Yeah, let's just jump to a really quick break, and then we're going to jump into that part of this story.
Oh, I guess crazy, guys. Hope you're ready.
All right, we're ready, man. We're ready.
Let's go.
Do zero-day exploits and supply chain attacks keep you up at night? Worry no more. You can harden your security with ThreatLocker. Imagine taking a proactive, deny-by-default approach to cybersecurity, blocking every action, process, and user unless specifically authorized by your team. ThreatLocker helps you do this and provides a full audit of every action, allowed or blocked, for risk management and compliance. Onboarding and operation is fully supported by their US-based support team. Stop the exploitation of trusted applications within your organization to keep you running efficiently and secure, protected from ransomware. Worldwide, companies like JetBlue trust ThreatLocker to secure their data and keep their business operations flying high. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can mitigate unknown threats and ensure compliance for your organization, visit threatlocker.com.
Welcome back after the second break, and we are about to get into the very, very interesting part of this story that changed the course of Sabu as we know him, and really kind of turned the page and started who we know today as Hector Monsegur. And this is all about the day things changed. So we've established Sabu was a cyber coding mastermind, worked in Anonymous, worked for LULZSEC, did some amazing hacks, and was basically what you would consider a black hat guru in the day. He's doing this, made the decision to go down that path, and then got caught. So we're going to talk about that. And the day it all changed would have been back in 2011. As Hector was saying, they were in the middle of the 50 days of lulls. So this was like the last ride of LULZSEC.
Mm-hmm.
And they're right in the meat of these hacks, day-to-day hacks, just going crazy here. Little did
You
I-
get
I
a
don't-
hack, and you'll get a hack.
Yeah,
You
everybody
get a
gets a hack.
I'm gonna hook
It's
you
like
too.
you guys were like the Oprah Winfrey of the hackers, giving
That's
away
right.
hacks to everybody. But did you? I guess let me start by asking this: did you know, or did you have any idea that you were being surveilled? And the day that things turned, what was your first indicator that said, "Oh shit, I think I'm in trouble now"? So tell that story.
Yeah, no, listen, things just felt off. And I knew that I had made a mistake when I compromised InfraGard Atlanta. Shout out to InfraGard, a good organization,
Yeah.
good people. If you guys,
Yeah.
if you guys are CISOs or you run
Yeah.
a business,
I'm an InfoGuard member.
there
Yeah,
you
me
go.
too. Me too.
Yeah. And I'm a supporter of InfraGard now. I support InfraGard Puerto Rico, and I support InfraGard in other states. But I knew that once I hit InfraGard, it was kind of it.
Yeah.
Because InfraGard, for you guys that don't know, is a fantastic organization. They do give you some really good alerts, and it's very community oriented. But it is the personal baby. It's the child of the FBI. The FBI
Yeah.
loves
Mhm.
InfraGard.
Mhm.
If you
Oh,
want
yeah.
if you want to upset the FBI, you attack InfraGard. But don't do that. That's what I did. That's
a bad idea. That's a
He's
bad
like-
idea.
Yeah. Don't do it. Right. So once I knew once I hit InfraGard, the FBI was going to hyper focus on me and take me down as soon as possible, post haste. And things started, listen, Chris Tarbell, really famous FBI agent. He took me down, took Anonymous down, took Silk Road down. He'll tell you Hector didn't know anything. Hector had no idea. But things are off. Right? Things are off. And maybe it was my own paranoia after the InfraGard hack. But I saw like the Con Edison guy hanging out with the postman, and then I saw like cars parked around that,
At this point, you're paranoid about everything, then.
Yeah, I lived in the hood. I come from the LES, Lower East Side, Manhattan, Avenue D. And so you don't really see a lot of white people hanging out there.
Yeah.
Right?
You
And
see
so
the
you
things that stand out.
Yeah, it kind of stands out. If you see one here, then one there, and then like there's 5 over there.
5 unmarked vans.
Yeah.
A couple of vans. I was like, I think there's something off here.
Yeah.
So I planned the day out. This was June 7th, 2011. I planned the whole day out. By then, big part of my story is I was a foster parent. I'm not sure you guys know this. I had adopted 2 little girls. I was raising them way before I even got involved with Anonymous. And I knew something was off. And I spoke to my brother. I said, listen, bro, I think they're going to come today. If not today, it'll be this weekend. And he says, all right, so what are we going to do? I said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take the girls right after school, and you're going to take them to church. It's a whole big church event all day long at church from 5 to 9 p.m., right? Or 11 p.m., sorry. So my brother went with the girls to church, and I waited in my apartment. And I waited, and then I got the knock around 9:30. Police, open the door. I'm like, why are the police knocking on my door? Right? I have not broken any state laws, city laws. So I open the door, and lo and behold, there's the FBI there. Chris Tarbell was there, looking, handsome as always.
That
but-
handsome son of a gun.
Yeah, fantastic guy. Now, he was on his way home when he got called back to do the raid. Okay? And so he wasn't dressed up in the usual FBI attire, the nice suit with the FBI jacket and the bulletproof vest. It was him in a pair of shorts and a wife beater and like a bulletproof vest. You know what I mean?
Wow.
And that's what it was. And so I looked at him like, hello? He's like, yeah, we need to talk, Sabu. I'm like, Sabu? Who's Sabu? But anyways, after a little bit of social engineering back and forth, because that's what the FBI does and that's what I do, right? He said, look, we know you had the 2 little girls, and we don't want to take them away from you, bro. Just come downtown. Let's figure it out. Do you have somewhere for the girls to stay? So yeah, they're gonna stay in my apartment with my brother, and they agreed. And I just went downtown and they laid it out, man. They said, look, we got you on this, on that, on this, on that. You're facing 125 years.
Damn.
You know, here's your guidelines. Here's what you're facing. Here's where you're going. That's the one thing I appreciate about being arrested by Chris. This is why he and I became friends, because Chris was very honest with me. One of the first things that came out of Chris's mouth was, you know how stupid this is? You're about to do life in prison for hacking. Like, you know how ridiculous and nonsensical this is? Like, you know, you need to really think about this nonsense. No, you could argue that Chris was doing a good cop, bad cop thing on that one, but the reality is he was not wrong.
Right.
He was not wrong, right? And he was like, look, I get the politics. I get all of that. You know, I know you should do some grassroots politics back in the days. I used to do protests in the streets in New York. I love grassroots. I love nonprofits. I did a lot of that stuff in my life. It is documented. But he was right. You know, I was breaking the law for the purpose of pushing a message. And I'm not even sure if anybody's getting that message. You know, I'm not even sure if there's any change that's coming of that message. And he said, look, you know, there's like 12 informants against you. There's a lot of people pointing their fingers at you. So, you know, you had this opportunity just to deal with it. You just man up and deal with it. I said, all right, cool, no problem. I'll man up and deal with it. And so I admitted to my crimes that night. I was there with him. He was drinking Pepsis all night. And I admitted to my hacks going back to the 90s. Say, hey, here you go. You want this? What you want? You got it. I said, just leave the girls at home. Don't call ACS, CPS, none of that nonsense. The girls are fine. And my brother will be able to take care of them until I get out, you know? And then, yeah, you know, honestly, what they want, just like any law enforcement, they want to know who the people are. Listen, well, guys, guess what? I'm part of Anonymous. I don't know anybody. But you know what I do have? I have exploits. I have a ton of 0 days. So we can work this out. There's one thing I know, because I'm always in the know reading and looking at history. There's one thing that the FBI likes. They like to barter. They like to barter, especially if you have something that they don't have.
Yeah.
I'll give you a good example. When I was locked up in MCC, the Metropolitan Correction, something or another, when I was locked up in there was this guy who you would consider kind of like a big dog in the cartels. He got extracted from Colombia. He was here in New York in MCC, and he was hanging out with me playing chess and dominoes, right? Having a whole grand old time. In my head, I'm thinking, this guy's doing life in prison. He ended up doing 10 years. Right now, he's somewhere in the streets, hanging out over here. He's probably in Connecticut or Delaware, living in a nice mansion somewhere. Now, the question is why? Why? Yeah. Here's why. I'm going to tell you why. He bartered. He gave the FBI what they didn't have, which was about 11 different mule routes from Colombia straight to the United States.
Wow.
How do you get your drugs from Colombia, from Medellin, to Florida? Well, we have a passage over here to Peru and a passage over here to Colombia. Then we have a passage through Panama. And then we got one to Mexico, straight to Arizona. From Arizona, we have this trucking company that, you know, blah, 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 straight to Florida. Everybody likes that. So he got 10 years, even though he probably caused thousands of deaths.
Wow.
You know?
Dude,
so in my case, I had a bunch of 0-day exploits. The FBI, if you guys know your history of the FBI was always good at compromising centralized organizations like the Black Panthers. The FBI was all in the Black Panthers.
Yeah.
Malcolm X's organization, the FBI was all in there, right? Pick any organization you want that's centralized, the FBI was in there. Where the FBI failed, right, were the decentralized organizations. So you guys know where I'm going, Waco, right, and the Davidians. The FBI could not get into those organizations because they were decentralized. There was no snake head, right?
Yeah.
They may have been some leadership, but there was never like, well, hey, we got this new guy, we're going to let him in. No. That doesn't happen, right? So what the FBI was curious about was how Anonymous, a decentralized organization, was able to engage thousands of political campaigns, operations, protests, simultaneously and without anybody leading the charge. And so I gave him insights on the hacking portion. I gave him a bunch of 0-day exploits, and I said, all right, cool. So what does that do for me? Yeah, that you know, we're gonna see. We gotta lock you up first. So I went to MCC. I was there for about 8 months, almost 8 months. Then after MCC, I was let out to be with my kids, be with my girls I adopted. And then I went back to raising them. I was banned off the internet. I had supervised release as well. And so for like 5 to 7 years of my life, I was completely on standstill. And so I had to produce. I had to survive. And I, you know, I got arrested for hacking, but I'm not criminally minded. I'm not going to go out there and sell drugs or rob anybody. So what I did was I got involved in the tow truck industry. and I started towing cars, and people that were accidents and flat tires, I would just show up on the set with my tow truck, just help them out. And so if you were ever in New York during that era and you got a flat tire or you had a bad accident, I more than likely, towed
This
your
would
car.
be 2012-ish, 2012.
2013, 2014.
Okay.
2015, I was at the end of my case. In 2016, I was back online.
So at what point, Hector, when you sat down with the FBI and they said, here's what we have on you, here's what you're looking at, this all adds up to 125 years, approximately. At what point did the reality of that set in that you're like, oh shit, I could do time for life if they're not going to cut me a break here? And at what point did you know they were going to offer you something to reduce that?
Well, because I had the exploits and I had methodology, I knew that I could barter with the feds.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that's kind of what they wanted. They knew I couldn't pinpoint nobody. I couldn't testify in court against anybody. So that wasn't useful for them. Remember, you got to remember the FBI, prior to us, they had a really good success against the La Cosa Nostra here in New York.
Yeah.
But La Cosa Nostra is physical. It's central.
Right.
We all know each other. I don't know these people. So the FBI
which is a good thing. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a good thing for everybody.
Yeah. And then of course, for me, it was like, well, I don't want to be a rat anyway. So let's figure out how we could, sort this out. And here's some exploits. Here's access to the U.S. Senate. Here's I did help them stop over 300 cyber attacks against critical infrastructure here. So, some of the states you guys mentioned that you guys are
That's
from.
huge.
I did stop some stuff in your state, Jason. And I did stop a lot of stuff that could have caused a lot of damage. Yeah. You got to remember, at that era, operational technology, OT for you guys out there, they were running with default credentials, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Default credentials 333-999, okay? 123, right? 789, right? From Siemens and these other companies. And they were being connected locally by lazy employees who didn't want to have a segmented network, right?
Yep.
So once I broke in, I had access to OT systems. I could log in over RDP, and bada bing, I could shut down the water supply system for our state.
Yeah.
And so I had all that information, and I gladly gave it to the FBI. Here you go.
Yeah.
And that's what saved my life, because I would have been locked up in there like a dork, 80 years, 40 years. The information, the amount of information, the amount of hacks that I stopped led to, during my sentencing, my Judge Preska, she's the chief executive judge of the Southern District of New York. She gave me a salute. She saluted me. She nodded at me. She's like, hey, you did a great job. Thank you for your service. But if I see you back in here again, I'm going to bury your ass. I said, all right, ma'am. And since then, I don't jaywalk. I don't want to hear shit. I don't want to hear nothing about conspiracies.
I don't roll through a red light.
Listen, I'm a square, gentleman, okay? Because I'm taking Judge Preska at her words, and that's a tough lady. It's a chief executive judge. When she tells you she don't want to see your ass again, trust me, I'm doing everything to avoid that. So
that's great.
So it allowed me to come back into the industry, and I had to prove myself, because as you could imagine, some of my victims were security companies. I targeted the security industry. Okay. I'm going to tell you guys why, if you guys don't mind. I'll give you 30 seconds, okay? So the reason why I targeted the cybersecurity industry is because at that time frame, you guys could agree with me if you want. You don't have to do it publicly if you don't want. But at that time frame, a lot of the cybersecurity industry was snake oil. Okay? A lot of it was BS, and a lot of it was, hey, if you want to use our product, you have to buy this appliance, and then you have to pay us monthly for that appliance on a lease. You guys remember that?
Yeah,
absolutely.
And most of the companies did that. They don't do that no more. They stopped that nonsense.
Yeah.
But that's how they took advantage of organizations back then.
Yeah.
Right? For something as simple as like a snort IDS in an appliance, and you're paying $500,000 a year for it.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of companies did not invest in cybersecurity until ransomware blew up the way it did.
Right.
And now they're forced to look at cybersecurity differently.
Then when everybody got smart and said, we're not going to fall for that anymore, they went to subscription-based models.
and they're right back to it. Now it's SaaS.
Yeah.
But man, I'm telling you, dude, just call this out. You're spinning my cap straight up. If you guys have been looking, my cap's been turning throughout all these breaks, because this is like next level, like epicness. And it's fascinating, just fascinating stuff. Like you said, Judge saluted you. You did a lot of deep stuff that in the end added a lot of positive value, even though you paid some time for it, added a lot of positive value. Let's talk now about where you are going with this. Like, what are you doing today, and how some of the advocacy work that you're doing today, and where you're going moving forward.
That's a fantastic question. It's very important to me because I could have faded into obscurity after my arrest. I could have just disappeared. The reality is that I'm not really good at much things. I'm not a good painter. I'm not a great singer. I love to sing, but man, you guys would be depressed if you heard me sing. I could do mechanic work, but I'm not a great mechanic. I could tow a car, but I don't want to do that for too long. I'm really good at understanding risk, breaking things, and then trying to figure out why the thing broke in the first place. I'm just a hacker. That's it. I'm really good at what I do. And so I decided that I should probably come back, and I had to earn the trust back of the community, of you guys, for example, right? I had to earn that trust by proving myself. And what did I do? As soon as I came back, I started doing bug bounty programs, which a lot of them don't pay. That's another scam we got to talk about some other time.
Yeah.
Did a lot of bug bounty programs. I helped a lot of organizations. In fact, United gave me close to 1 million miles on their bug bounty program, right? And that's how I was able to travel.
That's cool.
I was able to travel right after I come out of prison. I do the bug bounty for United Airlines, and bada bing, bada boom. I got 750,000 miles, and I started using that to travel and meet people. Took advantage, because what I ended up doing was I went to different schools, and I started giving out free speeches. I started doing lectures. I became an adjunct professor. A lot of that stuff is non-paid, unpaid, or low paid. And I just did it out of the kindness of my heart, but also to prove to people, listen, I'm not Sabu anymore, right? This is Hector you're talking to.
Yeah.
And they talk about mentorship, talk about, the cybersecurity industry as a career path. I spent a lot of time with CISOs over the last, especially the position I'm in right now. 80% of my conversations are with CISOs or CIOs or CSOs or CTOs. So I'm talking to executive teams, executive people. What are your concerns? Kevin, what are your thoughts? What are you thinking about? What keeps you up at night? Well, Hector, I got this and that. And, we did implement RDP on our domain controllers, but we haven't really validated that. Can you try to do an internal red team and compromise the domain controller and prove that? Yeah, so that's what I do these days, right? I'm still hacking. The only difference is not illegal, right?
Yeah.
And then, I'm just helping people as much as I can. Was it 2 months ago? I partnered up with Miami-Dade College and FIU, and we ran a CTF that we sponsored ourselves. We had about 150 students there all together. We did speeches for the local community. We had a good CISO. There's another great CISO, you guys. If you guys haven't heard of him, definitely get him on your podcast. Devin Bryant from Booking.com, another great CISO, smart guy, super astute, knows the game very well. He's been in cybersecurity since like the 80s, the late 80s. So with that being said, it's been a lot of academic and educational and also helping organizations understand their risk. That's what I do.
Yeah.
And I also have a podcast, and that's another thing I'm doing with the guy that arrested me, Chris Tarbell.
Yeah, that's the ironic thing is that you guys started the podcast. By the way, guys, podcast is called The Hacker and the Fed. Perfect name.
There you go.
It's Hector and Chris, the Fed, and they talk about, keeping companies safe and current modern day hacks and I'm sure you guys have probably told the story about the day that he arrested you a couple times on your podcast. And I'm sure
episode one.
Episode one.
Take a listen.
Yeah. So check that out. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I guess
should have an episode we have both of you on.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Podcast. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Oh yeah.
So do you guys live in the same area? You guys like hang out a lot and go grab beers every now and then? What's your relationship like outside of the podcast and the professional world?
Yeah, so outside the podcast, we became very good friends. I'll tell you guys a story, okay? Keep it super, super quick. So after my case was done, right, I became a tow truck driver and I'm living that life. Chris was still with the FBI. And by that, so after me, he took down Silk Road. So that was a whole big other chapter of his life.
Yeah.
And so he started getting death threats. His family was threatened because a lot of that was Russian drug money. You know how that goes. Right?
Yeah.
A lot of Russian mafia stuff. So now they're threatening his life. And he and his wife said, now, so, maybe this FBI thing, we could survive on our own. Let's branch off and leave the FBI. And he did. It was only until he left the FBI that he could reach out to me, and he did. He said, heck, I've been thinking about you all these years. You left me, you kind of changed me in a way. You changed my perspective, because I always looked at, the perpetrators as the bad guy. It was never no context. The perpetrator was just a perpetrator. I'm going to take him down. But I spent so much time with you, Heck, that I realized that, you was a foster parent. You did a lot of this hacking stuff, when you was a kid, just to get away, escape from your reality. You lost your family early on. You could have gotten in a terrible lifestyle. And you got into security and computers. It just so happens that some of the stuff you did was illegal. But I realized that, your inspirations weren't criminal in nature. It was just criminal adjacent. You were politically aligned, and you weren't trying to extort people. And I said, I need to sit down with him. So we sat down, and I had a dinner with him and his wife and his kids. His kids are beautiful. And ever since then, brother, we just stay connected. We see each other once a month.
That's awesome.
I'm in New York. He's down a little bit south. I don't want to mention where he's at. And so he either comes to me, or I go down to him, or we meet up at a conference. And we do security, we do speeches basically.
Yeah.
And that's how we meet up at least once a month.
Yeah.
Great guy.
That's an awesome
Very cool.
story.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
That's an awesome story. Well, you guys, this has been a lot of fun. And unfortunately, we have to end the conversation at some point. And serious, Hector, man, thank you for being on the show. A year ago, Kevin and I think it's been even 2 years since we initially heard about you, and been really wanting to get you on the show to talk in detail about, everything that we covered tonight. I think you have a really important story, and from the origins to where you are now and where you're heading and where you're leading to, it's a great story for people to understand all aspects of intent, a desire, of cybersecurity, of curiosity, of friendship, right? It has so many different aspects that are in your story. So thank you for being on and sharing that with us all tonight. It's been a lot of fun. Definitely spinning my cap.
Well,
that cap's a little cockeyed, bro. I'm telling you.
That's about how my brain is right now.
well, I would say thank you guys for having me and hearing me out, and thank you guys for your support. You guys are great people and have supported me in the past, and I got mad love for you guys. I do want to say something to the audience. Okay, if there's anybody out there on the executive side making decisions, okay, you run a business, you own a business, you run a security team, you're a CISO, you're whatever it is, right? The big problem that I've heard, the big issue that I've heard with people is, well, Hector, we have a talent shortness. We can't find the right talent for the money we're willing to give, or our budget is tight, or Hector, our budget is overrun, or, I've heard a lot of that stuff. But here's a good thing, right? A lot of what's happening right now in the cyberspace world, right, in cybersecurity world, we see a lot of the victims being compromised, either through info stealers and session hijacking or ransomware groups and all of that craziness. The adversaries are using, for the most part, the same methodology. It's not sophisticated. They're either getting into your network through an old SSL VPN that you forgot to disable, that has no VPN, no MFA on it. Okay. They're getting in through sprayed credentials that they got from an info stealer dump, or Russian hacker group that hacked your network 3 years ago, and you fixed that, but those passwords still haven't been changed because your AD policy does not rotate every 90 days.
Yeah.
Okay. And we see that a lot.
Yeah.
In fact, the Department of Interior did a report last year saying that after their analysis of X amount of agencies, over 20% of government employees that left their positions still had active accounts in the internal networks.
Wow.
Okay.
That's insane.
Right. So, old accounts, non-rotating credentials, no MFA, right? You might have invested in an NDR or an XDR, and you really have really cool Palo Alto this or Fortinet that. It's really fantastic. But you're not utilizing the network filtering capabilities and detection capabilities or response capabilities of the NDR, right? An NDR is a network detection and response. You're just using the product for the network part. You're not using it for detection and response. Look at the manual, speak to your sales engineer, understand what the product can do, and I promise you could block 80% of the attacks coming into your network.
Yeah.
Okay. And you might also be able to identify when there's a bad egress. Remember, when a ransomware actor gets inside of your network, they're going to break in, however they're going to break in. It could be insider threats, stolen credentials, whatever, but they still have to exfiltrate the files.
Yeah.
And if you have nobody watching your outbound traffic, then you might as well be an open door policy organization at that point. So
Absolutely.
you can take small steps right now. It's not going to destroy your budget, right? And you could do that and, secure your environment, your infrastructure, your network, and ask questions. Speak to the guys here. Send Kevin an email, Jason an email. Hey guys, how do I fix this? There's ways to do it without blowing your budget. I promise you. You haven't done an Active Directory audit in a long time? Go to pinkcastle.com, do it for free. That's
Great
it, guys.
advice. Great
Cheers.
advice. And I'll say this, Hector, you're hitting the nail on the head here, because there's a word for what you're saying. We call it low-hanging fruit.
Sure.
Everybody that has a minimal budget or thinks that they can't be doing something this year because we didn't get the money or whatever. No, there's so many things you can do that are free, that are just best practice. And if you don't know what those things are, Hector can help, Alacronet can help, Jason and I can help. Reach out, because those kinds of things will protect you more than you know. It's more often the low-hanging fruit things that bite you in the ass, as opposed to the big, 0-day breaches or even insiders. So keep that in mind. Hector, I want to close with one opportunity for the listeners to reach you. If they want to reach out to you, what's the best place? LinkedIn?
Yeah, I think the best place is LinkedIn. I'm not on social media like that, folks. But you could just search Hector Monsegur on LinkedIn. I'm like the only guy that pops up. I have a really weird name. I think it's another guy, but he's not related to me. LinkedIn is the best bet. So add me and send me a message.
Sweet.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Well, with that, we're going to close this one out. And until the next time, everybody, cheers.
Cheers.
Take care.
See you guys.
All right.
Thank you for watching our latest episode of the Cyber Distortion podcast. We only grow with your support. The best thing you can do to help us grow is to subscribe to our podcast on YouTube, follow us on X, and tell just one friend about the show. You can find out more about us on the blog site at www.cyberdistortion.com. Our X handle is @DistortionCyber, and you can also listen to our audio-only versions of the episodes on most major streaming podcast platforms. Just search for Cyber Distortion Podcast. Until next time, take care. Cheers.